going to do moonwalk here now. Okay, I think we sorted the sound. Good evening, everyone. I'm Wong Mun Summ. I'm from Singapore, from the firm WOHA Architects. I co-founded it with Richard Hessel in 1994, almost 35 years ago. So this talk will bring you maybe all the way back to tell you how we started and what becomes important to us today. And you can see I'm starting with this myriad of projects that we've done, but the most important principle is for us, form follows function. Not form follows function, but form follows systems. As I talk a little later, you'll understand what the systems I'm talking. Systems really is a set of things working together to form an interconnected network that makes a complex whole. I think this is an important thing in relation to where we are today in a world of climate change and rising seawater. This was my first project, the Datai Langkawi in Malaysia. And this was my first project that I was given when I first graduated. And it's one that is truly classic for me. But what it meant for me today now is what I did then. It was a resort project in an untouched part of Langkawi. And it was very clear to me at the beginning that I wanted to leave a very minimal intervention in the location. Fine, we've been asked to do a resort, but I want to do it in a way that would respect nature and respect the land. So that was the tall order I gave to myself. And this project now has been operating for over 25 years and recently has gone through a complete restoration. And today is almost like what it was in when it was first finished. So in 1994, I started the practice together with Richard Hessel. And as like all young architects, we really start with houses, small projects. And we're very fortunate that people know that I actually did the Datai Langkawi. And they looked for me and wanted to do a house that at the end, that they want to go back home and be able to relax and enjoy like as if they were in the resort. So we had a client who really valued the good things about the Datai Langkawi and wanted to replicate in an urban situation in the city in Singapore. And we did that for them. But what is actually very clear to us, we needed progression in our careers, in progression into modern architecture. At the time, in the 80s, contextualism, vernaculism was sort of the ism of the day, and that we did. And what's good about that is that we learn from tradition and from heritage. And, but with that, we need to move on. And here you can see, you get very truncated pavilions. And these pavilions are butting walls, and they are framed into a square reflection pool that creates the central space and the ambience and the feeling of the house. And when you come home, you'll be greeted with this wonderful pool of water, and that helps you to calm down and feel like you're actually back home, back into a resort. That was what the client wanted. And from one house, we made such an impact with the owner. The owner's brother came to us and asked us to do yet another house for them. And it was the brother's house. And here, the family was quite different. They valued their privacy, but at the same time, they also want to be able to enjoy the valuable garden space in Singapore, which is very expensive if you actually live in landed property. So they wanted to be able to open up, and we devised a somewhat upside-down house where the top can be turned into something that's very opaque and very solid. So what you see here is some louvers, where when it's closed, can become a very solid box. And this is actually the master bedroom and the master living, where they can have the privacy and at the same time open up to enjoy the breezes and the views out. But this was where we devised a new, sort of reinterpreted the monsoon window, where we will be able to close up the solidness of it as a wall and as a closure, but through a horizontal window, we were able to allow the breezes to come in. So you enjoy the rain and the breezes at the same time. And I think this was something that we later on used in tropical high-rise situation. So but one thing that we were true to our principle was that we wanted to look at program, and we also wanted to look at forms at the same time, where the program, we were dissecting it to components, and the form created in such a way that we could actually minimize the use of air conditioning and also allow breezes across the house. In this house, we were able to do it to a double-story staircase atrium, and in one direction. In the other direction, the windows were kept very open, and through the attic space, you were able to actually create some cross ventilation vertically as well. So after the second brother, they were so happy. The third brother came to us and said, we want to do yet another house. And along those principles, we wanted to articulate who they were. And it was the parents as one port, and they actually have 3 kids. And the 3 kids had each individual port. And these ports are interesting because it was an indoor and outdoor space. We didn't want to do purely a terrace or a balcony. We want to be able to use this space as an indoor space, air-conditioned space, as well as also be able to use it as an outdoor terrace or a non-air-conditioned balcony space. So there is actually 2 layers of doors and enclosure that allows it to switch from an indoor space to an outdoor space. And I think these 3 houses were actually very important to us because it informed us through the very fine scale. We were able to actually create, rethink program and rethink forms that allows to be sustainable in the way we live our lives. The choices we make is very important. And as I will speak later about, all of us do need to make the right choices. So you can see this section. The ventilation really is through the linear block and actually escapes at the top through a high-level windows. And again, only the bedrooms are air-conditioned. The living rooms can be closed up for air conditioning if necessary, but generally was encouraged not to be air-conditioned, but to actually enjoy the views out to the swimming pool and also to the gardens. And this actually informed us how we would do larger projects, both resorts to vertical high-rises. So from houses, one of the priests of this church, on this monastery, St. Mary of the Angels, which is a Catholic church of the St. Francis Friars, they went to one of the houses and to bless it. And they actually thought, hey, you know, this is a nice house. Maybe we could get them to do a monastery that they could also, you know, enjoy. But we did ask the question, aren't you taking a vow of poverty? They said, yes, but we want you to do it in such a way that it's not opulent. It is not about materials and expensive, but it's actually functional and yet allow us to live comfortably. So that was the task we were given. So not only is there a chapel for almost 1,500 to 2,000 people, but there are actually 2 monasteries that's attached to it. I won't show so much the monastery because they're very private, but they were very, very basic. We were using simple materials, almost bare cotton to plywood to effect the materials and the pallets for it. But what was really quite interesting for us was that a lot of the churches in Singapore, including the old church that stood on this side, was a very, it's not so much traditional, but the sort of across the nave and the aisle configuration. And, but what the friars wanted us to do was to even go back further when it was actually more like an assembly, and that would have been a better church chapel design for them. And because of St. Francis himself, to him the church was a simple shade cloth that provided shade and shelter for the parishioners. So as it evolved for us, we were just creating a very simple roof to actually articulate the same meaning as St. Francis had for his church. But what you don't see here, what you will see in the section of the building, is that there is high-level ventilation on two sides, and in the entrance, the glass panel in front, the doors, when they open, effect a very good cross-ventilation across the church. So when the church is not holding a full mass service, when it's actually a small one, they would not turn on the air conditioning. But when there is actually a mass in the evenings and on weekends, they would turn on the air conditioning. But we allow them to actually use it in a smaller way, that actually allow them to not use so much energy to run the church. So in the section, you can actually see the church is over there. And what we actually do have is a sloping lawn. And this sloping lawn is actually sitting on top of a columbarium. In Singapore, we don't bury people. We actually cremate them. And then they are put into a columbarium, which is in this case under the lawn. And we actually had this varying heights of the chapels, or rather the columbarium, so that we could effect this, Easter ritual where the parishioner would gather in the lawn, and when they bring the candles into the church, they would actually come right into the church on the right-hand side. So this is the holy fire, where with the candles they would actually walk into the church, and the way we did the lighting, we also do them and envision them as actually candles that people are holding. So the choreography and the ritual of the Easter festival actually coincide in this case. So these are the columbarium, and the height of them are actually varying. And what we have done is that we are able to actually have natural light and also rain coming in, pouring down the oculus into a reflection pool. And around the reflection pool, we actually have little metal plates that allows people to actually put candles in it as well. So we had a taste of what it was like to actually do community projects, and we actually liked that. And at the same time, this one came along. It was a resort development. And in my first, when I practiced with Kerry Hill Architects, we were grounded in the training of design resorts, where you tend to choreograph the way people would flow and would actually enjoy the experience in the resort. So for us, this it was a fairly no-brainer. But when the client came to us, they wanted to do something that was different, that was not like any other developments in Bali. And they asked if we could actually do something different. And for us then, we felt that it was time that we actually equate luxury with sustainability. And we actually asked the owner whether you would embrace sustainability, and they say yes. But at that point of time, even Four Seasons equated luxury with consumption. But now, all of them equate it with sustainability, and it's through this project. So this is actually on the southern tip of Bali, and it's a rather arid microclimate of Bali. And we wanted to really express the horizontality, because when you actually look at from the side, you just see a very wide horizontal expanse. And we wanted that to be the first thing that people appreciate. And we choreograph it in such a way that you're received, and then you're squashed into a smaller space, and then it opens up again to actually allow you to appreciate the wide horizontal space. And all these public spaces that you see in this picture are non-air-conditioned space. Here, we have very little air-conditioned space. Only the guest rooms are actually air-conditioned, and the hotel operator would ask the guests if they would like to keep the rooms non-air-conditioned in the daytime, and most of them would actually say yes. So this is the view across it, and you would see it's actually a very large drop. This is the iconic cabana, and it has become fairly iconic, primarily because of the remnant natures we did the timber. The fact is, this remnantness has a purpose, and this purpose was because we wanted to use recycled wood for this project. All the timber that's being used was out of recycled wood, and recycled wood comes because they're used, they come in all different lengths. And hence, we devised a system that while the structural support system is regular, the length that we use were uneven to minimize on wastage. Hence, it actually created this random box image, and it became quite an iconic element in this development, and also for Indonesia. So the other thing, too, that was important about this project is that it's actually in a rather arid part of Bali, the southern part. You don't get much rain. So water was very rare and very precious, and we wanted to highlight this. You do have a lot of reflection pools and ponds in this development, primarily because they are actually bioremediation of the grey water system. They're actually used to house, or rather store the water as retention and also detention ponds. So they actually serve a purpose, but at the same time, we wanted to highlight them as an element, as an essential element that is very precious as well. So all this are actually being explained to the guests when they actually stay here, so that they actually appreciate that they are living sensibly and also sustainably, but yet at the same time, you know, a good quality of life, luxury is not compromised. I don't particularly like the term luxury anymore. I actually like to equate it with good living. There's no reason why we can't live well, but at the same time, we do need to live sustainably. Nowadays, even the air we breathe, fresh air, is such an important element. And I think that is our God-given right to actually have fresh air. Even the detailing you see has got the idea of channeling water in the black part, where it's also, when that's channeled down, it actually is the path where it also brings in the dirt. So it's actually a bit resilient to weathering as well. And the idea of all the materials and the skill were actually very much that of Bali, and we wanted to actually use as much of the local materials as possible, and also to make sure that the craft and the skills are actually maintained. So this was taken day one of the hotel when it's open. So it was sited very carefully, constructed very carefully, with a very minimum impact on the site itself. And these are actually the water beds where the water is, the recycled water is filtered. And again, on the roof, we actually use the volcanic rocks from the site, and to actually use them on the roof. And because they're actually very porous, they became very good insulation as a insulation for the roof. So it also became like what it was, you know, seeing the roofs, you're actually seeing what the landscape was like before the development got in. And for us, it was the intellectual architectural part of it was that we thought of this aesthetic, this architecture as a conversation between Mies van der Rohe and Carlos Scarpa. And if you see it, you'll understand how we actually use freestanding columns, walls, and also the detailing is so much of the cobbling. And that was really for us a excellent tribute to these two great architects, and also at the same time being very sympathetic to the architecture of Bali. So the room was very simple. It was really about being walls, and these walls are garden walls. And like I said earlier, most guests would prefer to actually have them open fully, and only at night they are closed up to form an enclosed space where they would actually air condition it. So the section shows you, it is again garden rooms, very straight walls and a horizontal plane as well. And that gives you the conversation between Mies van der Rohe and Carlos Scarpa in the architecture and the language. So what was really interesting for us was that this was the second job after the church that we were asked to almost design every single thing in the development. And everything you see here, from the lamps to the chairs to the table, and the amenities are all designed by us, using as much local skills and crafts as possible. So looking back at the guest rooms, You can see it's just basically walls and horizontal flat roof. So we had a taste of a public institutional project, but at the same time, we also got a reputation of doing very good houses for the well-off. And one night, I actually got a call at 10 p.m. at night. And it was from this lady client who says, I really need to ask a special favor of you. It is very important to me. And she wanted me to design a bra rack for her. That would actually be how she would actually lay out her garments. So this was something that I told myself, hey, it's ridiculous that at 10 p.m. I'm being asked for such a personal request, and whether or not that's the kind of architecture I wanted to be. But I came up with a very good solution for her, realized it, and we became great friends, and from then onwards, I don't do houses anymore. So we took part, and for 2 years, after doing a series of houses for 5-6 years, we told ourselves we saved enough money. At the time, we were only 4% in the office. We have enough money in our bank account, and for 2 years, we could just keep going with competitions. And hopefully, we will realize a public and an institutional project. But very fortunate for us, we won the first 2 competitions that we did. They were for 2 underground MRT stations in Singapore, called the Marine Line competition. There was an open competition, international competition. So this was one of them, Brasa station. It was designed in the year 2000 and finished 8 years later. But what you actually see is actually the reflection pool here. But this reflection pool is also the roof over the big void that brings natural daylight all the way to one of the deepest stations in Singapore. So, but what we also wanted to do was to center it along this, one of the heritage buildings in Singapore, which is the St. Joseph School, but it's being repurposed as the Singapore Art Museum. And we wanted to actually align it in the middle, at the same time wanting to be able to bring light through the reflection pool that keeps the heat out, but actually brings daylight all the way down to almost a 10-story cabin. But at the same time, through reflection, we could elevate the historical building as well. So this actually served many purposes, where we were able to use the sustainable feature at the same time to also highlight architectural significance in the urban context. So the other station that we won was a stadium station. It is located next to the stadium, and the key to this design was really handling surge crowd and to be able to actually move people very quickly. So the curve form responded to the form of the stadium, and the other side is actually a straight line. So as you see from the plan, one side is a straight line, the other side is a curve responding to the stadium. But what it does, it forms a push of people who are from the outside into the middle, into the platform level, where they are then pushed into the trains. All the handling area are actually done outside, as opposed to what the Land Transport Authority wanted to do. They wanted to put it into a very deep station, push it all the way down. We pushed it up to preferring to actually handle the surge crowd on ground level, which is actually a lot better than to actually put it into a building. So this is what we have, where it's actually a curve and a straight wall. But what it also does is that it allows people to actually see through the ground level as well. As you walk on one side, both sides of the station, you're able to see right across. And you can see we have left a glass skylight on the top to actually bring in natural light. So because this is actually a stadium, we wanted people to actually feel, because they have been on the outdoors for so long, to actually feel cool and refreshed when they come in the station. And that's why the floor materials are actually done in a way that looks quite watery and actually very refreshing. So, not only did we win the 2 competitions, at the same time we took part in this competition called Dawson Plain Public Housing Competition in 2001. And we didn't win this project, but this is very important to us. It's a seminar project that for us has created a lot of interesting and impactful strategies for our work since then. And this was a cross-section of this social housing project of almost 2,000 homes. We conceived it as a village in the sky, where we have sky villages, we also have sky streets, and we also have sky parks. And with this project, we were convinced that we can actually replicate multiple ground levels. Ground levels for us is where people walk, and I think it's actually important to actually explain multiple ground level. Like this in a park, you know, I have eye contact with you, and as I walk, I actually can see people and actually start to acknowledge one another. But if you think of a high-rise building, it is basically a vertical cul-de-sac. And not only are you constricted within the lifts, there is actually very little social interaction. So for us, if we were to create a high-rise, high-density public housing project, we wanted to actually unlock this problem and to actually create social opportunities for people to actually make friends and to know each other. So that was a very important premise for this design. And I think we were not given this, as we were not the winners, we were placed second, primarily because most of the ideas were too radical, and the government told us that we broke many rules, we can't give it to you, but we do hope to be able to realize these ideas a little later. 16 years later, the rules were changed, and that we realized Skyville at Dawson, which I will show you later. So the idea was very simple, to use the towers as a structure to be able to support horizontal elements that allow us to choreograph the horizontal movement with this mega structure. And at the same time, with this horizontal circulation spaces, we were able to also domesticate this mega structure, where you are at any time, you don't feel that it's actually 50 stories, you actually feel it's only 5 stories to 10 stories. This was the rendering that we created, and to show how it was actually divided into 5 stories and then also 10 stories. So it brings it down to a scale where people are actually more comfortable, rather than actually to perceive the mega structure as a 50-story, 2,000-unit building. At any one time, you feel it is actually a much smaller building. And that was the main principle that we applied to Skyville at Dawson. So we didn't win the competition, but very quickly we were given a commission in Bangkok, and we were able to realize some of these ideas. So you'll see this rendering, this video, a drone video, which actually shows you the quality of the spaces, and some of them were part of the competition. Instead of a very solid central core and seal space, which a lot of the buildings were in Bangkok, we actually tore it apart and created 6 towers, a very porous structure, and also at the same time created vertical breezeways within them. And when I call them vertical breezeway, it's primarily because of the way the structure is and spaces inside. Because it has an internal space all the way up to 66 story, there is a temperature difference between the top and the bottom, and that could actually effect a very good cross ventilation across all the apartments. And that is actually 1.5 to 2 meters air movement speed across this vertical circulation. And connecting them, the 6 stories, were common spaces as well as private swimming pool and terrace spaces. So here you will see this is actually on the 9th floor, where we have all the common amenities, including a 50-meter lap pool. And in Bangkok, you don't build a basement structure, primarily because of very high water table. Everyone would actually build the car park above ground. And it was an opportunity for us to actually turn that car park into a series of green walls and spaces as well. So you can see at the bottom, it's actually cladded with green landscaping. And because it's a car park, it's actually very easy to maintain them. So what is really different is that this tower is actually very porous. When you see it, it's actually you can see right through it. And I think that is the key to a tropical high-rise building. It needs to be porous. It needs to have more surface area rather than less surface area compared to the plan. And here we started putting trees in the balconies. The reason why we did it was we wanted to create foreground interest. And when you don't have foreground interest when you're in a high-rise building, you're just looking into vastness of space. And when you have a balcony and you put something in front of it, it brings the scale down and it's actually a lot more comfortable. So that was the main reason why we actually start putting trees in our building. And as we move on, we evolve it into an integrated landscaping for many more reasons than just creating a foreground interest. So these are the private units where the spaces flow into those sky gardens and terraces, which are private, looking back in. But creating a terrace that actually has a very large volume above and that you will actually feel like you are almost fully outdoor, but you are actually in a high-rise situation. So the key to it was that even though you are in a high-rise, high-density situation, we also have high amenities in terms of provision of facilities, but also good cross-ventilation and fresh air. I went back to visit this building almost 5 to 7 years later because of it was being nominated for an award. I met an owner who actually eventually bought 15 apartments in this. And the reason he said this is the only apartment block in Bangkok that actually allows him to open the windows to enjoy fresh air. And that was the reason why he bought it. And I think that was a very good endorsement of our principles. So at the same time, we were also given a fairly smaller commission in Singapore, where apartments were getting much smaller. To compensate for small apartments, we wanted to create social spaces, community spaces outside to bring people out and to actually have them know each other. So that was a very important thing. And at the same time, by creating those sky gardens and terraces, we also created a 100-meter tall green wall that helps form that space, outdoor space. So while it's actually a cantilevered sky terrace, it feels comfortable. It doesn't feel like you are actually floating in the air, but it's actually very grounded, permanent, because there's actually more than one surface, horizontal surface that's green, but there's also vertical surface that's also green. So it actually does form a semi-enclosed outdoor space. So this is also one of the projects where we made it very clear that the difference between tropical high-rises is that for low-density buildings, horizontal buildings, the roof is the most important part. But when you're talking about high-rise building, the vertical surfaces are the one that you really need to concentrate your thermal performance of the enclosure. Here, all the walls are actually shaded by horizontal fins, and it actually provides very good ventilation for it. So fast forward to 2016, 5 years ago, we felt it was very necessary for us to make a statement. And we actually put together this Garden City, Mega City, Rethinking Cities of the Age of Global Warming. Today, it's not good enough to talk about global warming. We should be really saying global heating. And look at the things that are happening in Australia, and I think it's actually very tragic. And I think around the world, we do realize that climate change, rising water, our planet Earth is actually in serious trouble. So we wanted to create 2 books, one to explain the situation we are in, and on the other side, how we actually come up with solutions that address architectural, urban design, and city planning ideas that actually would be more sustainable, more resilient, and also at the same time, more regenerative. This was a mural on a wall we discovered in one of our projects in Mumbai. And it actually really speaks of what we are in today, where people are saying, is this not my environment? I don't care. It is not my time. You know, it's the next generation time. And also at the same time, this is not my trash. You know, if someone else's trash, I'm not going to mind about it. And I think this attitude, this apathy, is really causing the problem. We do now need to act on it. Our attitudes must change, and we do need to act on it to actually create a better world for ourselves to live in, not just ourselves, but for future generations. This is Shanghai. And buildings account for 30% of the energy consumption. And cities account for 35% of global emissions. And by 2050, 70% of the world population will live in cities. And I think this message is very clear. We cannot have urban sprawl anymore. All cities need to be compact. They have to be high density, compact, and yet at the same time, livable and high amenity. And I think we illustrated through our projects and our master plans how this could make a difference. And I think the city of future as being envisioned by Le Corbusier is so blown out of proportion and has created mega cities that are actually nothing but highways and roads that are marooning all the buildings and parcels by cars. It is not very connected. People movement is actually sacrificed. And I think this is something that I think we no longer should accept, but rethink how we have to have our cities planned or to be replanned. So in the book, we laid out 4 chapters, and these chapters relate to how we think layering cities, how we need to evolve urban design ideas. I mentioned before, multiple ground levels. We need to replicate the ground level in many ways, vertically, so that we can actually overcome the scarcity of the ground. And together with the idea of both ends, the building must do more than one thing. The building must do more than just simply house people, provide functions, but it also needs to generate energy, and it also needs to generate food for people. So we need to think of buildings as doing more things now than just one use. So high density, high amenities, I think I mentioned about it, and the very mixed-use cities, which you call cities within cities, and also creating sky villages, and yet at the same time domesticate them. But one thing in tropics that I think is a very different climate compared to the temperate zone is that we have abundance of sunlight. That is the source of all our energy. As compared to, say, New York, you don't get sun all the time. You won't be able to have a horizontal canopy that will harvest the energy. I think New York is interesting as a city with the highs and lows in the skyline. But in the tropics, we need to rethink the skyline. We need to think of it as a horizontal datum that is used to harvest energy. And it is the ground level, the lower levels, where we need to go high and low to actually allow movement, to allow ventilation, and to also allow vegetation and biodiversity to move freely underneath. So that's the idea of this inverted skyline. I don't think I'll show you a project with this master plan, but we are realizing a project in Singapore that has this principle with it, where we completely inverted the skyline, where we have a large solar canopy and actually a very thorough and porous ground level that is just a park. So planting cities is something I think we have kind of gained some reputation, where we created sky gardens, vertical screens, sky park, and topographical architecture, architecture that supports vertical landscaping. Breeding cities really relates to the tropics, where building forms and building typology need to effect excellent cross-ventilation in the building. There's one term that I like to use about breezeways, is that we need to create buildings that have no dead ends. And only if you have no dead ends in your building, then you're able to actually allow cross-ventilation to move across. The moment you actually create dead end, air doesn't actually move through it. So that's a simple idea. Rating cities refers to the systems I talked about form, follow systems. And we have put it down to these systems. green plot ratio, which is about vegetation, the green system. Community plot ratio is about the social aspect of buildings, where we need to create and break down all the walls, all the gated communities, and to create opportunities for people to actually bond and to create opportunity, social opportunities for the community. And we actually measure it to an index called community plot ratio. Civic generosity, I'll explain a little more. Ecosystem contribution index is really about helping to remediate our planet. And self-sufficiency index is about providing enough energy and food within our cities. So green plot ratio is very straightforward. It's the replacement of the plot area as green. All these ratings for us makes a difference because they are transformative in nature. And if it's done sufficiently and each city does enough of this, using this rating, the city will be transformed effectively and noticeably. And I think Singapore has actually implemented this, and you can actually see Singapore has actually done very well, and is actually known for all the integrated landscaping. Community plot ratio, as I mentioned before. Civic generosity index. We can actually say a person is a nice person, a person is a mean person, or a person is a vain person. Likewise, I think you can actually say that of a building. Whether the building is actually a nice building, whether the building is a friendly building, or whether the building is all about me. Look at me, I'm just a beautiful, sexy form. Look at me, look at me, look at me. But, and I think there's also a contract with the users and the city that the building needs to be civic about it. It needs to provide, or rather, it needs to belong to the city. So ecosystem contribution index for us is the degree to which a development supplements the city ecosystem and how we can actually bring back urban biodiversity into the city, and at the same time, by creating enough biodiversity and remediating all the vegetation in the city, we are able to actually remediate our planet. Self-sufficiency index really is about the development's capacity to provide its own energy, food, and water. And we use these ratings to measure our own projects. So as I show you next, we see all our projects as prototypes, as typologies. We rethink all building typologies and envision them as a more three-dimensional component within a new city that's about three-dimensional planning. So we use all these ratings to actually look at to measure our buildings. And here, this is PARKROYAL in Pickering, where we pushed it, the green replacement plot ratio to almost 250%, 2.5 times the site area. So just a little interesting point. The site in front of it is an urban park. More than 150 years ago, a philanthropist donated this piece of land to convert in a business into a park for the workers. And when we were given this opportunity to design this building fronting this park, we wanted to replicate this civic generosity by building the same amount of gardens, sky gardens within the building itself. So we recreated the same amount of area of this urban park as sky gardens in the buildings. So this is how we do it. It actually comprised of almost 15,000 area, and that we actually have the same amount of this garden, this urban parks area as sky gardens in the building. So how do we achieve all these extra areas? We chose not to build a basement. And I think basement is a funny thing about urban design. City planners, they always think that car parks are quite ugly, and they try to push it underground. But the moment you actually push it underground, you're actually committing a building to a lifelong sort of operation cost of running mechanical ventilation and also running the lights as well. If you actually push it up and do it in a way that is actually pleasant, we don't actually commit ourselves to these operating costs. So, but it also at the same time lend itself to something that becomes, for us, a topographical architecture, where it's able to support all the planters and the landscaping to create a more organic, rock-like structure that actually allows vertical greenery to actually thrive in. So even the walkways in the hotel are done as non-air conditioned spaces. We wanted the guests to come out and smell the city, and also at the same time walk past vegetation, reflection pools, and then it actually creates a vertical park for the social housing behind to actually enjoy. So this is the civic generosity of this building, allowing the neighbors to actually enjoy some vertical landscaping, a vertical park. There's a bit of sound to it. Can you see whether you can turn it up? It's a city sound, basically, just to make sure that you know this is real. Actually, the proportion is gone. I won't touch the computer, but the proportion has gone funny. So the building is actually a little bit more horizontal, so just bear with this. Just imagine everything being fatter. So you can see the fifth floor is very porous, and it allows actually, it doesn't block ventilation in the city. This is a very friendly building in the sense that it allows air movement in urban context, in a city context. Not responding to this. Okay, it's not responding to this. Maybe that's the cause of it. The other project that I wanted to show you was the public housing project that I mentioned that after 16 years later, the rules were changed. We were able to actually realize this project. And we were invited by the ministry to envision public housing into the 21st century. And here, I think what you do need to recognize is that we created a lot of community spaces, and that you can see we have created 140% of the site area as community spaces. These community spaces are actually very impactful, primarily because they are open to everyone. It is not gated. Anyone, even for a tourist, can actually walk in the building and enjoy all the horizontal sky gardens in this place. So there are actually altogether almost 1,000 homes in here. It's a bit of a mega structure. But what we have done, which I'll show you in a couple of simple diagrams, how we actually break down the scale of it, not just to domesticate the mega structure, but also to conjure up the notion of sky villages. So these are the social spaces, the community spaces, the village green, the village sort of common areas. Even the furniture are designed as super durable furniture. They're all actually made of hard acrylic and concrete because this is public housing. It needs to handle very wear and tear use. And these are the vertical breezeways that effect very good cross ventilation in all the apartments. And most of these buildings, most of the apartments are actually used as a naturally ventilated apartments. And people actually choose not to air condition their homes because of the good cross ventilation. But when we do have a haze in Singapore, unfortunately, we do have to close it up and air condition. And And the roof, what we do have is a penthouse for the people, where we wanted the best place in a high-rise building to be given to the public. And you see the solar panels on the roof. This is the platinum-rated building for ESD. So the idea is very simple. This is actually the site, and there's actually a linear park that runs parallel with one edge of the site. And we wanted to actually create a meaningful connection between the people living here. And there is a typology called the slab block, which I grew up in. I grew up in one of these public housing projects, and I do remember when I was on the ground floor, my best bud was actually on the 10th floor, and he could look out the corridor and scream at me and talk to me, and I would recognize him. So that audio and visual distance was an important element in creating this Sky Village. I wanted to maintain that. And that would be the furthest distance that you would actually can go to actually stretch the limit of the distance. But at the same time, we wanted to create privacy for the apartment so that there's no overlooking to it. And here we created the diamond-shaped slab block where we had an internal space created inside. And on top of each Sky Village of 10 stories, we actually dedicate an area that is for common use, which we call the Sky Village, Village Green. And on each 10-story stratum, we have 3 Sky Villages, and that we actually replicated this 2 times, 3 times, and 4 times. We could go as much as we want, really. So the density is not an issue if we can actually domesticate the mega structure and still make people feel like they are in a much smaller building. So that is the principle of it. But of course, the structure must be able to support all this number of villages in it. So this is what the inhabitants have got to say about
No
this
doubt
project.
this residential complex is quite big scale. It's like concrete jungle. But yeah, at the same time, it is quite small scale in the sense that the units are actually housed within certain villages. They're actually connected by all these intermediate sky gardens. It makes us want to not just stay within our homes, okay, but really to spend some time outside to just interact and bond with one another.
I think with all this being presented together, it increases the chance for interaction and also engaging the neighbor and the people around you. That's something that's lacking around in many parts of Singapore where you're just purely living in an urban jungle.
The idea of this building is trying to make it like a kampong style where you really try to meet up each other. When you're getting quite late in the night, it's actually very quiet. And the wind is good.
So we can have our dinners while enjoying the view over there. That makes it a perfect place for us to communicate and then to socialize among other neighbors.
So the other project that I'm showing now is a building on steroid, where we recreated a green plot ratio of 1,110%. This has an impact on the city in a way that I will actually mention later. But this is actually, we think of a tropical skyscraper. So this is a site area, 45 meters by 45 meters. These are the users. 30 species of plants on the sky gardens, another 20 species of creepers on the facade, giving us a green plot ratio of 1,100%. It sort of remediate the green replacement of not just itself, but 10 other sites of similar dimensions. But what is important is that if you see these two neighboring neighborhood parks, one which is a linear, and one is actually a neighborhood park, it has the same amount of biodiversity it has on the tower itself. So what is important is that while we do have horizontal park, I'm not saying we don't have it, but for buildings itself, we can actually conceive them as vertical parks as well, that we could also help bring back biodiversity, urban biodiversity. And not only that, you can see this is a thermal imaging of the building as compared to a glass and steel curtain wall building. It is almost 25 to 30 degrees lower in temperature, in surface temperature. And this goes a very long way in combating urban heat island effect and sort of improving thermal comfort in the city. So I'll just skip to the next one, which is Kampung Admiralty. This one for us was meaningful primarily because this was a mixed-use development. It's a social mixed-use development comprising of elderly homes. And I think what was really important about this is located next to the train station, and that most people in almost every society doesn't quite want the elderly homes sort of right in their backyard. And I think at that point of time when this project was conceived, that was the kind of public sentiments that was going around. And we wanted to actually demonstrate with this project that you could have elderly homes in a development, and yet it is a it is a important contribution to the neighborhood and the precinct. So the solution was actually quite easy. The simple moves that we made was that this is a site area, and these are the main functions in the development. There are 4 very distinct functions comprising of commercial, community, social housing, and a medical center. And combining medical center with elderly homes is a fantastic idea. Green is a commercial component, and the medical center becomes a large footprint umbrella to actually support a public thoroughfare and plaza for the people, creating a tropical community space below it. And then on top of that, we actually have community spaces where we have daycare for both, not just the young, but also the elderly. And by mixing the two, the intergeneration bonding was an excellent move that was made here. And the treatment of it was a sky park where we have lots of landscaping, a lot of fruit trees were planted in it to bring in and attract biodiversity. And the 2 social housing elderly homes simply just sits on top, creating a safe and secure environment for the elderly. And yet at the bottom, you have a very public thoroughfare. So the layering you can see in the section, the medical center in the middle, where we actually also have a green space in the middle. And also this is one project that we have initiated, the vertical remediation of water as we collect them and clean them and store them, use them before it gets discharged into the public drains. So this was 6 months from completion. You actually have a very mature garden. And the kind of biodiversity you get is actually tremendous. And you can see from this slide, the little green, square green is the Kampung Admiralty. And the other triangular one, which is even bigger, it actually has less biodiversity in it. It's just quite shocking that because we planted it in a way that attracted more insects and birds, it actually has a richer biodiversity in it. So this is just a video clip of it. hole in the middle is the oculus, where it connects the public spaces with the private spaces above. They also allow natural lighting. It effects a cross ventilation upwards into this oculus. But when it rains, there is a canopy that comes across it and closes it up. So these are the elderly homes. They're very small, 35 to 45 square meters. And you must be 55 years old before you can actually buy this. And what is wonderful is that the medical center is conceived as a living room for this elderly. We want them to actually come and use it, not because they're sick, but to come and talk to the doctors and the nurses to keep them connected with the medical center so that they actually can look after them and encourage them to be healthy and active. And you have young and old, playground for both young and old. Okay, I'm told I've got 5 minutes, but I will actually have 15 minutes of Q&A, so I will not answer any questions. I will continue for 15 minutes, but I'm sorry, but I won't answer the question in that case. I'll just continue for the next 15 minutes, because there are a few projects I would want to show. Not this one, though that was an important one. I wouldn't even show this one. This is the crazy one. But this is something that we are doing in China, which for us is important that we handle the scale and also tackle one of the most populous cities in the world. And this was conceived as two slices of hills, and that the slice of hill is actually vegetation that would do some sort of ecosystem contribution towards the city. So what it does, it harvests water, like it's flowing down a hill. It would actually be cleansed as it goes down, and all this cleansing of water would be manifested as waterfalls cascading down and to be enjoyed, and then at the same time create almost a hill that they look into that would support good urban biodiversity. So this is our latest project that we won just before the Wuhan virus. That was the last destination, Hangzhou, and we were very happy to win this project, primarily because this was a demonstration project for China, and they had been to, a lot of the government officials had been to see Kampung Admiralty, and they actually invited us to challenge us to rethink resettlement housing in Hangzhou. And this is happening within the inner city in a very old district where all the buildings are almost 30 to 40 years old, and that they needed to go a lot higher density. But because of the height restriction of not to be seen from Westlake, they wanted a very compact design, but they felt that they needed someone outside China to have a go at it. So this is in a different climate. It's in a temperate zone. But the idea of actually creating communities, and one of the things that we wanted to do was do mahjong ports that is part of the social corridors, where not only are the living rooms looking out into the social corridor, you actually see people playing mahjong in all these little ports that are stuck to the social corridor elevation. And we also adopted winter gardens as a device that mediate between the truly outdoor and the indoor, using this device as one to control the thermal performance of the enclosure. And also, this is a very in thing. It's you have resettlement housing that are actually being lived in by elderly people. At the same time, China wants to bring in, they call them talents, but they are younger generation of graduates and also overseas graduates back to China, and to make them contribute to the city. And to do that, they have to create housing to make it affordable for them, to almost roll the red carpet to them, to actually invite them in. So the fact that this is a younger generation, the millennials, they think differently, they like shared spaces, they like social interaction. So we conceive them at the lower part of the development. You'll see in a short while quite distinct horizontal datum where they connect to sort of commercial spaces, recreational and cultural spaces. This development is actually built around an old factory. That's why you actually see this funnel. And we actually kept that part to have a connection back to the past. But it became a matrix of south-facing residential blocks connected by multiple sky streets and also sky parks. And the ground, the semi-basement, which is actually the first level of basement, is actually open to the sky. It's actually where the community will come together. There's a lot of community and recreational use and focus to this datum. And the development sits on a park, and we were able to, in this densification, also have more than 100% green replacement. And also with community replacement, we hit a high of something like 250%. And you not only have one level of running track for the younger generation, the healthy generation, but you have a strolling park on the roof for the elderly that actually would look into Westlake. So you can see the lower levels, which is almost 4 to 5 story. It's like your urban scale of sort of low-rise buildings. And above is a matrix of almost more than 2,500 units of resettlement housing. So these are the interconnected nature of the sky streets. And what is actually quite good too is actually facilitates very good movement within the buildings. I can go visit my neighbor without having to go to the ground, take a lift, but I can just walk across, climb 1 or 2 flight of steps to see my neighbor. So this is actually the rooftop park that anyone can actually use. This was a mid-level park that only the residents can use. And as a plan, you can see south-facing a matrix of public housing, social mixed-use components within this resettlement development. This is a second last project, very quickly. We wanted to, as an assignment that I had for the university, National University of Singapore, we wanted to see how we can push density to the fullest in the tropics and at the same time create a very livable environment for it. The task was to actually create 100,000 people per square kilometer. And this is 4 times that of Manhattan. And if you think about Burj Khalifa, the tallest building in the world, one Burj Khalifa would actually house almost 7,000 people. We would need 30 Burj Khalifa to actually create 100,000 people in that 1 square kilometer. And we will need to stack this 3.5 times. But we chose to actually use one of our buildings, the Met in Bangkok, as a prototype to test this typology of the density rather, and that we needed 134 of this Met, this building, to actually create the density that we require. And if we to sort of scale it up into a city, what do we get? So we thought of it as a city grid of 1 square kilometer with interconnected horizontal datums. And this is the ground level. And using the buildings, the Met, as city columns, supporting horizontal city conduits that will facilitate horizontal movements of trains and personal mobility devices. But we needed to stack it 3 times only, and no taller than Burj Khalifa. Singapore has a population of now 6 million people, but what we wanted to do was to house an alternative Singapore in the southern part of Singapore through the southern islands, and also to touch lightly onto the sea in the southern part of the Singapore. And as a matrix, this is what you get as a permeable lattice city. Oops. Sorry. So you can actually see the old city.
Doors are closing.
From us envisioning the city, we go back to a very small thing. And we are being commissioned to do the Singapore Pavilion at the World Expo in Dubai. This is a zero energy pavilion. If it's actually used in the long term, it's also zero emission. And it's zero waste. And we're actually doing a resources passport to ensure that all the materials used in this development will be in one way or another be reused somewhere else. But we are actually creating an oasis in the desert. And as part of this whole exercise, we will demonstrate at the pavilion how we could actually scale up this oasis and create an alternative kind of a city for Middle East. Instead of a city of high rises, I think the solution isn't so much skyscrapers. It's one that is actually a low-rise typology that you can actually create enough horizontal surface to actually harvest the abundance of sun energy in the Middle East, and yet at the same time create a very livable, a very sort of a green oasis as an alternative city for the Middle East. So do come and see it in October this year. Thank you.